Hey everybody, Mr. Maupin here once again, taking a look at Reconstruction, APUSH video, topic 5.10. So far when we've been talking about Reconstruction, we've really only been looking at it through a Southern perspective, at least the idea of the impact of Reconstruction during the South. And, you know, it's easy to be myopic and kind of think that this is the only thing that's going on in America, during this, 12-year time period. But that's obviously not true. There's a lot of stuff going on in America beyond Reconstruction policy. And a lot of this is going to be centered on the actions. Many of these are going to be centered on the actions of the Grant administration. Now, remember, Ulysses S. Grant was a beloved war hero. He leads the Union Army to victory, saves the Union in the Civil War. And because of his popularity there, he becomes president. Now, we have seen in the past successful military heroes go on to become successful presidents, such as, George Washington. But that doesn't really guarantee anything. Grant is going to be a very interesting figure historically. At the time, his stock is going to be pretty low. And we're going to get into the reasons why here in just a moment. But in recent years, his stock has kind of gone up due to his willingness to kind of fight for some aspects of Reconstruction. But we're going to get into that at a later point. Today what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a lot of the problems and issues that are going to be going on associated with his administration that's going to certainly taint and stain his administration's reputation for many years. And, a good way to kind of describe this period, you had the 1830s, the era of good feelings. Well, a lot of historians looked at the 1870s and viewed it as the era of good stealings. And the big reason for that is that this, in many respects, is going to be the apex of just out-and-out fraud and corruption and theft and bribery that is going to be associated with the federal government. The Grant administration is going to be synonymous at the time with scandal. And I mean scandal after scandal after scandal. For example, the Credit Mobilier scandal, which is going to be associated with members of Congress and the Grant administration getting kickbacks from railroad companies, hoping to get favorable legislation to help give them land grants to build their railroads. We also saw the whiskey ring scandal, which included federal bureaucrats working in the Grant administration that were responsible for issuing licenses for the creation of alcohol and the collection of taxes on, those collection of those excise taxes on alcohol. And basically what you had happening was that you had those officials that were basically pocketing the money and not giving it up to the federal government. You also had the Indian ring scandal, which was folks at the Bureau of Indian Affairs taking money that had been budgeted to it from Congress, money that was to be spent on reservations at the time in terms of shelter and food and clothing and stuff like that. And basically the bureaucrats there buying, substandard building materials, rotten food, all these things to basically minimize the cost of providing for reservations and then pocketing the difference themselves. So it was just scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal. Now note, Grant himself personally is never going to be associated with any of these specific scandals himself, but he is going to be viewed as, weak in terms of being able to find good, competent, honest people to, run the federal government. He seemed to kind of be, just weak in that regard. Now, no, that's at the national level. If you were to go to the, the local level, the municipal level, you could argue that it was even worse at that level. We see this period, mid to late 1800s, as the golden age of the political machines and the political bosses that ran them. Now, political machines existed for the purpose of trying to manipulate votes to basically control elections. So, for example, political machines would, find poor immigrants that didn't know people, didn't have, any opportunities, and would, provide them with opportunities for housing and for food and for a job. And in exchange for those opportunities, they would demand that they vote for their specific candidates in their party. And basically what this does is just manipulate the electoral process, denying people real choice and opportunity who they want to vote for because they feel beholden to the political party that provided them with these other opportunities. We also saw political machines, engage in rigging elections by, getting dead people registered to vote and then having people impersonate said dead people to go vote on election day. The idea of, taking somebody that, was looking for, some whiskey for the day. Well, buy them a couple shots of whiskey and then take them down to the polling location and tell them to vote for a candidate. Have somebody vote multiple times using different aliases. This is where the famous phrase, vote early and vote often, comes from. So you had all of these different ways that these political machines would basically try to rig elections in their favor. And just about every major city had something like this going on to some degree. Most of these were dominated by the Democratic Party in these locations, but the most infamous of them all by far was Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall was the name of the Democratic Party headquarters in the city of New York, and it was led by a man by the name of William Tweed. Now, Tweed was the local boss, and his nickname was Boss Tweed. And basically, nothing got done in the city of New York during the Civil War and Reconstruction era without Tweed's approval. Now, note, Tweed was never mayor. He was not the governor. He didn't hold any real significant political office. But since he ran the party, and that party determined who would be the candidates for office and who would be the elected officials in office and making those decisions, Tweed was the guy behind the scenes that was really pulling all the strings. And if you did want anything in that city, once again, you needed Tweed's blessing. So, for example, let's say that you're a construction company and you want to get a bid from the city to build a new bridge, well, that's all fine and good, but you're not going to get that bid. You're not going to win that bid from the city, that contract to build that bridge, unless you take care of the party. You know what I'm talking about, making sure that you grease the wheels, make sure you make a little donation to the party leadership there. If you wanted to, be a teacher, for example, you had to provide a kickback or a bribe to the party bosses just to become a public school teacher in New York City. So, nothing got done unless there was some type of kickback, bribe, greasing the local official. That is how things got done. And it just led to millions upon millions of taxpayer dollars getting stolen just in the city of New York. And so over time, the infamy of the Tweed Ring is going to come to the attention of the newspapers, and a pretty amazing artist by the name of Thomas Nast is going to really play a critical role in the bringing down of Boss Tweed in terms of making political cartoons that show him engage in all these nefarious activities, stealing of funds and things like that. So Thomas Nast is going to be a critical role as serving as almost like a muckraking political cartoonist to expose the criminality and fraud in local government in New York City. Also, fun fact, the same Thomas Nast is also the man that came up with the modern depiction of Santa Claus. So yeah, same guy that brought down Boss Tweed is the same guy that brought you modern Santa Claus. How about that? Anyway, but if we're looking, once again back at Grant, Grant is going to be seen as the president that it cannot stop the whirlwind of scandals that are always encircling him. So, it would seem that Grant's a pretty flawed candidate when he runs for re-election in 1872. However, the Democrats are even in a worse position. Remember, the Democrats are still, trying to recover from the Civil War. They're still associated with being the party of the South. The Republicans are going to be waving that bloody shirt. And the man they nominate is an interesting character by the name of Horus Greeley. Horus Greeley was this, very kind of far out liberal from New York that, you know, was this, how can I put this? He was a moralist in many respects, that government had to be cleaned up, but he had these very, you know, far extreme views on a lot of things. You know, he was just considered weird for the time. Like, he was a vegetarian, for example. You know, in 1872, that was considered kind of weird. And so Greeley was kind of considered to be too extremist, and Grant still had the war, you know, experience going for him. And despite all of the scandals, Grant is still going to be winning, and as you can see here, winning pretty handily here. It's going to be a blowout in terms of Grant being reelected. So, you know, this is not a really good time in American history if you're talking about promoting the idea of, you know, honest, good, functioning government. Certainly not the case. And as if the first term of Grant was problematic, the second term becomes even more problematic, because in 1873 we're going to see the worst economic disaster hit the nation, at least up to that point in history, known as the Panic of 1873. And like most financial panics up to this point in American history, it's focusing in on over-speculation in a particular area. And in this case, a lot of over-speculation in the railroad industry. And, you know, when you build this bubble up and invest more and more and more into railroads and some other things, and there's not enough demand to back up that investment, then the bubble bursts, investment's lost, and then loans get called in, people lose their jobs, it's a giant mess. And when this panic sets in, it does create some concerns about, you know, being able to pay off debts. If you are someone that is in debt, you want to be able to more easily and cheaply pay back your debts. That's why those that were indebted are going to be promoting a more widespread use of paper currency. Now, we started to see a nationalized paper currency start in the 1860s, the greenbacks, when Lincoln was president. But, you know, and yes, you know, paper money is good because it does not hold value. It can be printed and can, you know, devalue. And the idea being is that if you owe $1,000, it's just $1,000 bills, regardless of the value that it's worth. So debtors like inflation. However, if you are a bank that has been loaning money out and now you're owed money, you don't want paper currency. You want hard currency. You want currency that is actually backed by gold and silver. And that way it holds its value. And so you kind of have this question, all right, where do we go with the currency? Should it be hard? Should it be soft? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And basically, the Grant administration is going to be siding with the forces of hard currency. They're going to be siding with the banks, the lenders. This is going to lead to the Specie Redemption Act, which is going to say that all paper currency must be redeemable for its value in gold. That you can literally go to a federal bank and say, here's my 10 paper dollars, and be able to literally get $10 of gold in your hand. So in other words, it shows that it's holding value. Now, note, this is good for maybe a more sound currency, and it certainly helps the lenders and the banks, but in many respects, it kind of nails the debtors to the wall and makes it harder to actually pay back debts. In fact, the value of the currency is risen to such a degree, we actually have deflation take place, that the price of things goes down. Now, you might think as a consumer that's a good thing, but if you owe money and deflation happens, that means you're literally making less money. And so it becomes even harder to pay back your debts. That's why those that are going to be on, you know, the debtor side of the aisle in this financial period are going to be supporting the Greenback Party, an independent third party in 1876, to try to get us back on a paper currency basis that will allow for inflation, allow for an easier ability to pay back debts. All right. Beyond that, I also wanted to make mention that, of course, we know that women's groups are going to be fighting for suffrage rights, and we will see that happen. We're going to be seeing women fighting for suffrage rights across America, including Wyoming becoming the first state to allow women the right to vote in 1869. Western states will be on the forefront of this due to lack of population and a desire for more women to settle there. So we're seeing the beginnings of that. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.